Ever since the initial spoilers for Universes Beyond Doctor Who, I've been inspired to make a DAVROS Dalek creator deck. Now, this Grixis commander has a lot going for him, and we can also pursue multiple different build paths with this commander. We could either go with the strong token synergy, discard, wheels, mill, and even reanimator. And that's because this commander reads, at the beginning of your end step, create a 3/3 black Dalek artifact creature token with menace if an opponent has lost 3 or more life this turn. Then each opponent who has lost 3 or more life this turn faces a villainous choice. You draw a card, or that player discards a card. Now, on the surface, this seems pretty straightforward. We're going to have some symmetrical burn effects, which increase our card advantage, while at the same time making numerous 3/3 Dalek tokens with menace, which will eventually overwhelm our opponents. And although I love the spirit of this commander, he's clearly gated by the number of opponents we have. We will never be able to make more than 3 Dalek artifact creature tokens per turn cycle. So stick with me as we turn this supposed disadvantage into our advantage. And for those of you that are looking forward to looking at the winners from the giveaway that I did last week, they're going to be up on screen now, and I'll give you some time just to pause the video here. Okay. If you see your name up on here, I want you to email me, and then we'll talk about how to confirm, and then we'll get your card shipped out to you. Congrats, guys, and thank you again. Grixis colors speak to my soul. I initially fell in love with the game through the Izzet commander Niv-Mizzet Perun, and as we add black into our colors, it opens up innumerable possibilities. When I first started building Davros, I initially had the thought, let's just play Gutter Snipe, Firebrand Archer, you know, all the symmetrical burn effects coupled with a ton of instants and sorceries. However, in practice, in my experience, this rarely works. Why? Well, let me explain. Sometimes you'll get out something like a Firebrand Archer early. We'll use Firebrand Archer as an example here. And this Archer draws a ton of attention early because it's pinging everybody for one. It's alerting everybody on the table that, yes, I am a problem. You have to deal with me. And that, unfortunately, is a relatively small amount of life loss, especially early in the game, compared to how our opponents are going to react to it and respond to us. So this is going to paint a huge target on our backs and often puts us very far behind when otherwise we could have just taken a slower approach to the game and then ultimately taken it over. Now, the only reason that we play burn effects is to get Davros's ability to trigger in the first place. But I think this puts too much pressure on our commander to perform. Now, we're in Grixis, so we have a lot of power in our deck. So instead, I want to use a all parts of the Buffalo style approach here. So tokens are going to matter, burn will matter, and yes, of course, discard is going to be a theme here as well. Overall, this deck approximates a Spellslinger theme with splashes of variety for our win conditions. I absolutely love this build. So let's start with my favorite part of the deck, which is the wheels. Now, we're running cards like Windfall, Whispering Madness, Wheel of Misfortune, Reforge the Soul, Collective Defiance, and Magnus the Wheel. Now, Magnus admittedly is not an instant or sorcery, but the remainder fall into the instant and sorcery category, which will have heavy synergy with our instant and sorcery payoffs in the deck. But in a vacuum, I find the wheel effects are some of the most potent in the entire game, especially for casual, mind you, because you're able to refill from 1 card to 7 effectively. And sometimes we can also, not in response, but we can do it if somebody tutors something into their hand and then we can get them to discard it, which also has heavy synergy in our deck in the first place. It's just overall a huge upside. And as a note, you could run other wheel effects, but all the ones that I chose for this deck specifically discard. Others allow you to shuffle back into the deck, but that doesn't have synergy with our commander. That's very important as we go into this next section. I get that some people are uneasy with wheeling. It can freak you out that our opponents are drawing that fresh 7. However, in reality, if we build our deck correctly, we will end up reaping the most reward. So let's start with some direct discard strategy. First is Waste Not, then Liliana's Caress, and finally Bloodchief Ascension. Now, these are all amazing ways for us to capitalize on our opponent's discarding. Just imagine the sheer amount of mana, zombie tokens, and card draw we'll get off of a single wheel and discard effect with Waste Not on the battlefield. And the beauty of running enough of our wheel effects is that there's a good chance that we can probably draw into another as we wheel, immediately allowing us to do it again, and then keep digging or extracting value off of the enchantments that we have on the battlefield. Now, if that's not enticing enough for you, let's talk about reanimation, namely cheap reanimation. With multiple hands being discarded into the yard, it's likely that either us or our opponents will have something desirable that we want to get back out of the yard. So cards such as Reanimate, Animate Dead, and Dread Return. So let's talk about Dread Return for a moment, because normally it's actually pretty expensive to cast this. However, we will often be discarding our own hands, so we can strategically discard Dread Return into the graveyard which is desirable for us. Remember that we're running a token strategy here, so being able to pay for that buyback cost of sacrificing 3 creatures is actually quite easy for us to do, which is essentially going to give us a free spell to reanimate one of our huge threats out of the graveyard. So what do we want discarded? What do we want to reanimate for cheap? Well, there's a few obvious choices, namely Magnus the Red, Niv-Mizzet Perun, Olvika Enigma Goliath, Psychosis Crawler, and the Locust God. Mostly just looking to skirt around the steep mana costs, which normally would balance these cards. And I am salivating at the idea of reanimating a Niv-Mizzet Perun for 1 black mana. This will win games by itself, I promise you. And when you routinely start playing cards like Niv, the Locust God, Olvika, you quickly realize that you more or less just take over the game if you're allowed to untap with them. But I am giving you the opportunity to do this ahead of time on the turn they come into play for extremely cheap costs. Thank me later. Before we get into token shenanigans, let's talk about our very last graveyard piece, Underworld Breach. Now, I can already hear some of you groaning, as I'm sure many of you have been comboed by this card. And if you think it's too powerful to run, then by all means cut it, but I will be including it in my deck. This card lets us replay out of the graveyard for 1 turn at the cost of exiling an additional 3 cards from our yard. Now, immediately we have a few like semi-infinite combos, such as Stormkiln Artist and Burning Inquiry, which lets us go through our entire deck while at the same time either profiting off of our discard or by our instant and sorcery payoffs. Really, Stormkiln Artist plus a single mana spell, as long as we have enough in our yard, mind you, lets us keep digging, tutoring, reanimating, you name it. This is just one more reason to not be afraid to discard our own hands, as it acts as a win con in the process. You have to love it. So what about tokens, Kyle? You keep talking about it. Well, here's another experiential component of the deck, meaning that I've experienced it, so you don't have to. So we're running 5 total token generator cards in this deck if we include our commander. The other 4 are Magnus the Red, Olvika Enigma Goliath, Talrand Sky Summoner, and the Locust God. Why so few? Well, the reality is we don't need a million token generation effects. Each of these in isolation are incredibly powerful. And I would much rather have 3 to 4 really good effects than 6 to 10 mediocre ones. Magnus is going to cost reduce things to basically 1 mana. Olvika and the Locust God go wide immediately with haste, allowing us to kill on the spot. And Talrand is just classically ridiculous if you let him stick around for literally any amount of time, and often will just enable our other plays. These tokens, if not immediately game ending, also will trigger our commander, which will create even more advantage. But the beauty here, is that we don't need our commander to make these effects good. That's the point. Our commander is simply the cherry on top. Let me highlight 2 cards that have some synergy with our tokens. Many people are running Wizard class. However, I would challenge you to run Sorcerer class for this deck. So Sorcerer class is 2 mana for an enchantment for a looting effect, which is already really good in our deck. But in addition to that, the next level turns our tokens into mana dorks. That's right. All of our tokens are now mana dorks. And what else? They can also tap to add levels to this class. And the final level is a symmetrical sort of like burn/storm effect, which either looks like multiple triggers for Davros or just perhaps a win condition. The next card is Dowsing Dagger. Hi, Richard from MTG Goldfish. And no, I'm not just including this for you. It's genuinely really good in this deck. All of Davros' tokens have Menace. Our commander has Menace. This means it's going to be so easy to proc the dagger, flip it, and then have some insane mana acceleration. Give this card a try. I promise you, you'll like it. We've hit on a majority of the highlights, but it wouldn't be complete without some big flashy spells. What better with our insane mana acceleration than some huge X spells such as Exsanguinate and Torment of Hailfire. The rituals, Jessica's Will, tokens tapping for mana, Bergian Urbrask, all of this sets us up for some massive X spells, which in most cases should be able to close out the game. And if you have the luxury, just remember to keep up some mana for counter spells to protect our X spells while they are on the stack. I really hope that you give this deck a try. I went through various iterations of the deck before finally landing on a strategy that both spoke to me, seemed powerful enough, while at the same time being consistent enough to warrant a video. And that process alone took upwards of 5 to 6 hours, not to mention now on the back end, the additional production time to make this video possible. The continued support of everybody has been just incredible and honestly has made this process quite enjoyable. I hope that you all stick around for all my future future uploads, so subscribe, please. As always, you can find this deck and my others linked in the Architect profile down below. You can also find my business email, and also on my About page you can find it if you want to reach out with any business inquiries. Growing the channel means more chance for outreach and chances to collaborate with other creators on projects, which is a big goal of mine. Support my addiction so I can continue supporting your addiction. I've been Kyle, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.